People have asked over the years why the St. Olaf Choir performs a cappella and not with an accompanist, and that's because they've had bad experiences in the past. Putting somebody at the keyboard of a big grand piano is putting too much power in the hands of one person. Don't you know it? And let's not even talk about organists. A strong-willed pianist came into Northfield and had their own ideas about sacred music, and they drove the choir director crazy. It began with an accompanist named John Philip Sousa, who sat at the piano in a big uniform with brushes on his shoulder. He had a white rifle leaning against the keyboard. He made everything sound like 4/4 time, even if it wasn't. He played loud, and at the end of a hymn, he picked up his rifle and he fired it at the ceiling. That was it. He was done, out of there. They brought in a Russian accompanist named Stravinsky, great musician, but the tempo problems. The guy kept rushing and then slowing down, changing keys, weird chords. People looked at each other and just shook their heads. He liked to shake the choir off by changing keys suddenly. And then he'd do a big solo. And that was the clincher. No solos. It's a Lutheran school. Sergei Rachmaninoff came to St. Olaf, a tall, sad-eyed Russian emigre. But suddenly we were in the black keys. We were in chords that Lutherans did not grow up with. And that made the choir weep, and Rachmaninoff would weep along with them. And then beautiful women in long black gowns would come sweeping in out of the shadows, and poets with wild, dark eyes, and none of them were students. And so he had to go as well. A man from New York came to accompany the choir. Charles Ives was his name. He was a nice man, well-dressed, but he had a habit of playing different tunes at one time. He'd play A Mighty Fortress, and he'd throw in parts of Sweet Betsy from Pike, and My Country 'Tis of Thee. And he threw in a lot of notes that Lutherans have been forbidden to sing. And finally, he was glad to leave Northfield and get back to the insurance business. A woman named Evelyn Palmquist replaced him. She was a very nice person. She played with or slightly behind the choir. And she would clean up afterward for no additional charge. This young French pianist named Claude Debussy came. He was a very talented man, but he'd play an introduction to a hymn. And it just went on and on and on. The guy couldn't find the melody in a paper sack. Didn't know how to resolve something or when to quit trying. He played a processional for the choir once, and the choir wound up going out the back door and into the woods. Then they swung the other way, and they got an accompanist named Gershwin. He came from New York, very polite man. But somehow he didn't seem completely committed to Lutheranism. And when he played a hymn, people in the audience would forget where they were, and they'd look up at an usher and say, "I'd like a Manhattan for myself," and a young man named Philip Glass came along. The choir tried to figure out how to sing with him. Mr. Glass didn't seem committed to Lutheran hymnody either. He liked to stay on one note for longer than a choir ever could, and just repeat it and sometimes jump ahead. And it was minimalism. And then we made it more minimal by sending him back to New York. Leonard Bernstein arrived, man with a lot of pizzazz, a lot of gusto, a kind of a Broadway guy. Bounced around on the piano bench, and sometimes he'd jump up and grab the baton, and that wasn't going to work. Somehow he made A Mighty Fortress sound like a dance from West Side Story. So we were glad when he left. So Miss Palmquist returned. She was 132 years old, but still a trooper. She died a few years ago. They were pretty sure that she did. Her expression changed. She sort of sagged at the keyboard. So they buried her. And she didn't object. And since then, the St. Olaf Choir has been a cappella. It just seems easier. Mr. Philip Brunelle at the piano.